$3 million. Do we have more than 3 million?
4 million.
Okay, now 4 million. Do I hear $4 million?
$3 million. Do we have more than 3 million? The auctioneer's voice boomed through the microphone. In the second row, a wealthy man raised his paddle high. The auctioneer nodded quickly. Okay, now 4 million. Do I hear $4 million? The bidding was wild, and the crowd of millionaires was full of energy. But right during this chaotic bidding, a tiny toddler slowly walked onto the stage. She was a poor maid's daughter, wearing mismatched socks and a faded shirt. But around her neck was a cheap, plastic-beaded necklace. The bright stage lights hit the plastic beads, and in the front row, billionaire Thomas Cole froze. His face went completely white. He stood up so fast his chair flipped over. Stop. Stop the auction right now. Thomas roared, his voice cutting through the bidding. The auctioneer dropped his gavel in shock. Why did a piece of cheap plastic just bring a $4 million auction to a sudden halt? Before we find out why this cheap necklace shocked a billionaire, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more emotional stories, just like this one. Also, leave a comment down below and let us know where you are watching this video from. We love connecting with our viewers from all over the world. Now, let us dive deep into the story. The grand ballroom of the Cole estate was the place to be that evening. It was the annual charity gala. The richest people in the city were there. They wanted to see and be seen. The main event of the night was the auction of the Blue Tears diamond. It was a family heirloom belonging to the Cole family. Thomas Cole sat in his VIP seat. He looked calm, but inside he was bored. He did not care about the money. He did not care about the high society gossip. He only hosted these events because it was good for his company's image. As the auction opened, the excitement in the room grew instantly. The items were incredibly rare. The final piece was the beautiful diamond necklace. $3 million, the auctioneer called out, looking across the sea of wealthy guests. Do we have more than 3 million? A man in the second row raised his paddle confidently. The auctioneer pointed toward him. Okay, now 4 million. Do I hear $4 million? Thomas sipped his drink. He looked away from the stage for a brief second. That was when he saw her. A tiny girl with big, brown eyes was crawling out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. She looked confused by the bright lights. She held a small teddy bear with a missing ear. Nobody else noticed her at first. The crowd was too focused on the intense bidding. But then, the little girl stood up. She walked right toward the glass case, housing the expensive necklace. Thomas's eyes locked onto her. He was about to signal security to gently remove the child for her own safety. But then, the bright stage lights hit her neck. The little girl was wearing a necklace made of cheap, pink and blue plastic beads. In the middle of the string was a small, scratched silver charm. It was shaped like a broken half of a heart. Thomas's hand began to shake. His glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, splashing liquid everywhere. He stood up so fast his chair flipped over behind him. Stop. Stop the auction right now. Thomas roared. The auctioneer froze. The entire crowd turned to look at Thomas. People began to whisper. What is wrong with Mr. Cole? A woman whispered. Is he having a medical emergency? Another asked. Thomas did not care about the whispers. He did not care about his dignity. He rushed up the steps of the stage. His expensive leather shoes clicked loudly in the silent room. The security guards moved toward the little girl, thinking she was in danger or was the cause of the problem. Do not touch her, Thomas commanded. His voice trembled with a mix of anger and sheer panic. He reached the little girl and dropped to his knees. He did not care that his designer suit was touching the dusty stage floor. He looked directly at the cheap plastic necklace. He gently reached out his hand, his fingers shaking violently. He lifted the small silver charm. On the back of the scratched silver half-heart, there was a tiny inscription. It read, Together Forever, T and G. Thomas felt a tear roll down his cheek. He looked into the little girl's big brown eyes. They were the exact same eyes he had dreamed about every night for the past 4 years. Where did you get this? Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. Sweetheart, where's your mother? The little girl did not look scared. She pointed her tiny finger toward the back of the stage, behind the curtains. "Mommy is working," she said softly. To understand why Thomas Cole was crying over a plastic necklace, we have to go back 5 years, before Thomas was a billionaire. He was just a young man trying to build his business. He worked 18 hours a day. He slept on a small couch in his office. He had big dreams, but he had no money. During that difficult time, there was one person who kept him going. Her name was Grace. Grace was a schoolteacher. She did not care about wealth or status. She loved Thomas for who he was. She bought him groceries when he could not afford food. She stayed up late with him, helping him organize his paperwork. She was his rock. On their first anniversary, Thomas wanted to buy her something beautiful, but he only had $20 left in his bank account. He walked into a small gift shop. He felt ashamed that he could not buy her real gold or diamonds. Instead, he bought a cheap, silver-plated necklace. It had 2 halves of a heart. One half said T for Thomas, and the other said G for Grace. They connected together. When he gave it to her, he apologized. "I promise, Grace," he had said, holding her hands. "One day, I will buy you the biggest diamond in the world." Grace had smiled, her eyes filling with tears of joy. She put the necklace on immediately. "I don't want diamonds, Thomas," she told him. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever owned. I will never take it off." Shortly after that, Thomas's business took off. A major investor noticed his tech company. Almost overnight, Thomas became a millionaire. The money started rolling in faster than he could count. But wealth changed things. Thomas became consumed by success. He was always traveling. He was always in meetings. He started missing dinner dates with Grace. He forgot her birthday. He became surrounded by people who only cared about his money. And slowly, he began to think like them. One evening, Grace confronted him. "You are changing, Thomas," she said softly. "We don't talk anymore. You only care about your status." Thomas was stressed and tired. He said words he would regret for the rest of his life. "I am building a future for us, Grace. You should be grateful. Look at this apartment. Look at the clothes I buy you. Stop complaining." Grace looked at him with deep sadness. "I never wanted your money, Thomas. I just wanted you." The next morning, when Thomas woke up, Grace was gone. She had packed her bags and left. She did not take the expensive clothes or the jewelry he had bought her later on. She took nothing, except Thomas noticed the cheap half-heart necklace was missing from her vanity. She had taken the only thing that truly mattered. Thomas tried to find her. He hired private investigators. He spent millions of dollars searching for Grace, but she had vanished completely. It was as if she had disappeared off the face of the earth. For years past, Thomas became a billionaire, one of the richest men in the country. He had everything money could buy, but his heart was completely empty. He never forgot Grace. He never loved anyone else. And now, standing on the auction stage, he was holding that exact same necklace. Thomas stood up from the stage floor. He held the little girl's small hand in his. The crowd in the ballroom was still staring in total confusion. "The auction is canceled," Thomas announced to the room. He did not care about the loss of revenue. He did not care about the angry looks from the wealthy bidders. He walked off the stage, leading the toddler behind the velvet curtains. The auctioneer quickly tried to calm the guests, but the event was ruined. Everyone was talking about the billionaire and the poor child. Behind the curtains was the backstage service area. This was where the catering staff and the cleaning crews worked. It was a stark contrast to the beautiful ballroom. It was full of boxes, dirty dishes, and busy workers in plain uniforms. "Mommy," the little girl called out. She broke free from Thomas's grip and ran down the hallway. Thomas followed her quickly. His heart was beating so loud, he could hear it in his ears. The little girl ran toward a woman who was kneeling on the floor. The woman was wearing a gray maid's uniform. She had her back turned, and she was scrubbing a spilled drink off the floor. "Ruby, there you are," the woman said. Her voice was tired but full of love. "I told you to stay in the break room. You can't run around here, sweetie. Mommy will get fired." The woman stood up and wiped her hands on her apron. She turned around to pick up her daughter. Thomas stopped in his tracks. It was Grace. She looked thinner than before. There were dark circles under her beautiful eyes. Her hands, which used to be soft, looked rough from hard labor. But it was her. It was his Grace. Grace froze when she saw Thomas standing there. She gasped, her face turning pale. She instinctively pulled Ruby close to her chest, as if trying to shield her. "Thomas," she whispered. Her voice was full of shock and fear. "Grace," Thomas said. He took a step forward, but Grace took a step back. "Please," Grace said, her voice trembling. "Please don't fire me." Ruby just wandered off. She didn't mean to cause trouble. "I will leave right now. I will pack my things and go." Thomas felt a sharp pain in his chest. She thought he was going to fire her. She thought he was still the cold, heartless businessman who only cared about rules and money. "Grace, no," Thomas said, his voice soft and broken. "I am not going to fire you. I have been looking for you for 4 years." Grace looked down at the floor. "Why? So you could show me how rich you became?" "I saw the billboards, Thomas. I know you are a billionaire now. You got exactly what you wanted." "No, I didn't," Thomas said. He took another step closer. This time, Grace did not move back. "I got the money, Grace, but I lost everything else. I lost the only person who ever truly loved me. I have been miserable every single day since you left." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the man she used to know. He looked different now. He was wearing a suit that cost more than she made in a year. But the look in his eyes was different. It wasn't the arrogant look of a businessman. It was the look of the broken young man she had loved in that tiny office. Thomas looked down at the little girl, Ruby, who was hiding behind Grace's legs. Ruby was looking up at Thomas with curious eyes. "Grace," Thomas said, his breath catching. "How old is she?" Grace closed her eyes for a moment. A single tear ran down her cheek. She knew she could not hide the truth anymore. Not after he had seen the necklace. "She is 3 years old, Thomas," Grace said softly. Thomas did the math in his head. The timeline was perfect. Grace had left him 4 years ago. "She is my daughter," Thomas stated. It wasn't a question. He knew it in his soul. Grace nodded slowly. "Yes, she is your daughter. Her full name is Ruby Grace Cole." Thomas dropped to his knees again, right there in the dirty backstage hallway. He covered his face with his hands and began to sob. He was a father. He had a beautiful, healthy daughter, and he had missed the first 3 years of her life because of his own pride. "Why didn't you tell me, Grace?" Thomas cried out. "Why didn't you come to me? You knew I had money. You knew I could provide for her. Why choose to live like this? Working as a maid, scrubbing floors." Grace looked at him, her expression a mix of pain and pride. "Because when I found out I was pregnant, you were already changing, Thomas," Grace explained. "You were always shouting about contracts and investments. You told me that everything had a price tag. I was terrified." She knelt down beside her daughter, holding her close. "I didn't want my child to be raised by a man who thought money could buy love," Grace continued. "I didn't want her to grow up in a cold mansion with a father who was never home. I wanted her to know what real love was, even if it meant we had to live in a tiny apartment, even if it meant I had to work 3 jobs to buy her milk." Thomas listened to her words. Each sentence felt like a knife to his heart, but he knew she was right. For years ago, he was a monster. He would have hired nannies and tutors, but he wouldn't have been a real father. "And the necklace?" Thomas asked, pointing to the plastic beads around Ruby's neck. Grace smiled faintly. "I couldn't keep the expensive things you bought me. They felt dirty, but I kept the cheap necklace. It reminded me of the man I originally fell in love with. The good man, the kind man." She looked down at Ruby. "One day, Ruby found it in my jewelry box. She loved the bright colors. I didn't have enough money to buy her toys, so I let her wear it. I told her it was a magic charm from a prince." Thomas reached out and gently took Grace's hand. Her hand was rough, but to him, it felt like home. "I am so sorry, Grace," Thomas whispered. "I am so sorry for what I became. But please believe me, I am not that man anymore. Seeing that necklace tonight, it woke me up. I don't care about the gala. I don't care about the diamonds. I just want my family back." Grace looked into Thomas's eyes. She saw the sincerity. She saw the deep regret. The anger she had held onto for 4 years began to melt away. The charity gala ended early that night. The guests left, whispering about the strange events. The rumors spread like wildfire through the city's high society. Everyone wanted to know why Thomas Cole had stopped the auction for a maid's child. But Thomas did not care about the rumors. He didn't care about the news articles. That very night, Thomas drove Grace and Ruby away from the venue himself. He did not use his driver. He wanted to be the one at the wheel. He drove them to his large mansion on the hill. When they arrived, Grace looked nervous. The house was enormous and intimidating, but Thomas did not lead them to the grand formal rooms. He took them to the kitchen. He rolled up his sleeves, took off his expensive jacket, and made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for Ruby. He sat on the floor with his daughter and let her smear jelly on his expensive shirt. He laughed for the first time in years. Grace watched them from the kitchen counter. A warm feeling filled her chest. For the first time in 4 years, she felt safe. The next day, Thomas made major changes in his life. He stepped down as the active CEO of his main company. He hired a trusted manager to run the daily operations. He realized that no amount of money could buy back the time he had lost with his daughter. He bought a beautiful, cozy house in the countryside. It wasn't a cold, modern mansion. It was a home with a large garden where Ruby could run around and play. It took time for Grace to fully trust him again. They did not rush into anything. They started over as friends. They went on walks. They talked about their past. Thomas apologized every single day, not just with words, but with his actions. He was present. He listened. He put Grace and Ruby above everything else. One evening, a year later, Thomas and Grace were sitting on the porch of their country home. Ruby was playing in the grass with her teddy bear, laughing happily. Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Grace's heart skipped a beat. She thought it was going to be a massive, blinding diamond ring. Thomas opened the box. Inside was the cheap, silver-plated half-heart necklace. He had taken it to a professional jeweler, not to replace it, but to clean it and reinforce the chain so it would never break. He held the other half of the heart in his hand. He had found it in his old desk drawer. "Grace," Thomas said softly, "I promised you a long time ago that I would buy you the biggest diamond in the world. I realize now that diamonds are worthless. This cheap piece of metal is the most valuable thing I have, because it led me back to you." He looked up at her, his eyes full of devotion. "Will you marry me, Grace? Will you let me be the husband and father you both deserve?" Grace smiled, tears of happiness blurring her vision. She didn't need to think about it. She saw the way he looked at Ruby. She saw the way he cared for them. The man she loved had truly come back to her. "Yes, Thomas," Grace whispered. "Yes, I will." Ruby ran up to the porch, hearing her parents laughing. Thomas picked her up and hugged her tight. Around Ruby's neck was the colorful plastic bead string, and now, around Grace's neck was the restored silver heart. Thomas Cole had spent years trying to buy happiness with billions of dollars, but in the end, his life was saved by a piece of cheap plastic and a love that money could never buy.